They found it resting awkwardly in a clearing, propped against a tree line like a forgotten trophy that refused to return to the sky. The jungle had tried to claim the wreckage. Vines wove around its landing gear, and its once bright metal surface had dulled beneath a thin crust of humidity and dust. Yet even in stillness, the aircraft's shape spoke of motion. The Japanese soldiers who stumbled upon it did not need to be aircraft experts to know it was unlike anything they had trained to face. The twin booms alone defied expectation, framing the cockpit with a predatory symmetry. Nothing in their manuals resembled this silhouette. Nothing in their schooling had prepared them for an American fighter that looked less like a traditional warplane and more like a mechanical predator stranded on the wrong side of the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The Zero, their pride of the sky, was beautiful in its simplicity. Single engine, lightweight, instinctive in a dogfight. This machine, however, seemed built for an entirely different philosophy. It was heavy, armoured, and unapologetically complex. The soldiers approached cautiously, weapons raised not because they feared an ambush, but because its very presence felt foreign, almost threatening. They could not know that this was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, an aircraft that would redefine what air superiority meant in the Pacific. Their boots sank slightly into the damp soil as they circled the nose. Its cannon ports, dark and empty, seemed to watch them back. The propellers, though bent, remained intimidatingly large, hinting at tremendous power. Twin engines on a single fighter. Why would American designers take such a risk? Japanese airmen believed dogfights were tests of maneuverability and instinct, where the lightest turn could mean victory. Yet here was a machine that challenged the very doctrine they had built their confidence upon. The officer in charge, a young lieutenant who had flown the Zero only months earlier, brushed his fingers along the nacelle's metal skin. It was still smooth, despite the tropics. He had read about turbochargers, experimental concepts whispered among engineers, yet he never imagined the Americans would place them so boldly into combat. He wondered what kind of strategy demanded such excess power. The pilots he had trained with believed finesse was more valuable than muscle. They thought engines were mere servants to skill. But this aircraft told a different story, that raw power could be just as decisive as grace. The clearing filled with murmurs as more soldiers arrived. Some poked at panels, others inspected control surfaces. A few, emboldened, climbed atop the wing. From that vantage point, they could look down into the cockpit, where the seat, though empty, still held the ghost of urgency. The canopy had shattered on impact, leaving shards that sparkled like glass fangs. On the floor lay a map, faded and torn. It showed a route across the sea, plotted with careful care. Perhaps the pilot had tried to return home. Perhaps he never had a chance. What caught everyone's attention, however, was the complexity of the instrument panel. Japanese fighters were intentionally straightforward, emphasizing instinct and responsiveness. The Lightning felt like a flying command station. Dials, gauges, switches, each one had purpose. Engine temperatures, turbo pressure, fuel management, everything demanded attention. To fly this machine, one needed not only courage but mastery of its many systems. The lieutenant imagined American pilots undergoing extensive training to handle such a beast. He wondered if that training gave them an edge Japanese pilots lacked. One soldier discovered the radio. Its wiring still seemed intact. The concept of long-range, clear communication among fighters was something Japan struggled to master. The Zero's radios were weak, often replaced with extra fuel. Yet here sat a robust communication suite that suggested coordination, mutual support, and an ability to adapt mid-battle. The Americans were not sending lone wolves into the sky, they were sending coordinated packs. Nearby, a mechanic examined the landing gear, marvelling at its strength. The P-38 could survive rough landings that would cripple a Zero. The officer noted the shape of the wings, their thickness hinting at durability and lift at high speeds and altitudes. He imagined the aircraft diving from the heavens, engines howling, cannons ready. No wonder pilots reported being attacked by fighters that seemed to come out of nowhere. He remembered a briefing, stories about a strange American fighter with two tails, lightning fast and capable of climbing beyond reach. Many dismissed such accounts as exaggeration, tales told by nervous pilots after chaotic combat. But here it was the myth, made real. One soldier knelt near the nose and carefully wiped debris away from the paint. Beneath layers of dirt, he found an insignia, a white star within a blue circle, proof that this was no captured or imitation design. This was authentic, American, and far from home. The officer paced thoughtfully. He imagined this aircraft in combat against a formation of Zeros. The Japanese fighters were unmatched in low-speed turns, able to dance like leaves caught in the wind. But the Lightning wasn't designed to dance. Its design spoke of speed, raw, relentless speed. In a straight line, the Zero might never catch it, and with two engines, it could fly farther, faster, and higher than anything Japan had in production. He thought of the stories circulating among pilots, P-38 seconds intercepting bombers at impossible ranges, escorting them deep into enemy territory, then vanishing with a roar. Others claimed these fighters could dive at such speeds that pursuing Zeros would tear their own wings if they tried to follow. Some whispered that the Lightning's pilots could choose the terms of battle: engage when advantageous, withdraw when at risk. The officer ran his hand along the machine guns mounted near the nose. With all guns clustered forward, the P-38 didn't need to rely on convergence calculations. It fired a focused stream of destruction. In a head-on pass, a Lightning could shred an opponent before either pilot blinked. But why was it here, abandoned? They found no body. Perhaps the pilot had survived the crash, slipping into the jungle. Perhaps he had not. The story of how this Lightning came to rest would remain a mystery, but its arrival, even in ruins, would ripple far beyond the clearing. Japanese engineers soon arrived, summoned by urgent dispatch. They studied every panel, every seam. They took notes, made sketches, and debated theories. One spoke of the turbochargers tucked behind the engines, marveling that such technology had reached the battlefield. Another pointed out the heavy armor plating, suggesting the Americans prioritized survivability. They compared it to their own fighters, which relied on agility and feather-light construction. The Lightning represented a different philosophy: durability and power at any cost. One engineer whispered about resource availability. America had the industry to build such machines in numbers. Japan did not. The thought hung heavy in the humid air. The P-38's twin engines fascinated them. Even damaged, they exuded presence. A single engine failure would cripple a Zero, but this aircraft could limp home on one. That reliability extended a pilot's survival odds, allowing missions deep into enemy territory. No wonder American pilots were bold. They flew machines that favored their return. Squadrons reported sightings of twin-tailed fighters escorting bombers over vast distances. Normally, Zeros dominated the early war thanks to superior range. The Lightning challenged that domain. It stretched the battlefield, forcing Japan to defend farther from home, spreading their limited assets thin. The Japanese soldiers, previously confident in their aerial supremacy, felt a subtle shift in perspective. They had always believed their pilots' skill compensated for any shortcomings in machinery, but this discovery suggested the Americans were advancing in leaps, not steps. Technology, once an abstract concept, had become a tangible threat. The officer listened as engineers argued how quickly Japan could replicate or counteract the Lightning's advantages. Some said it was impossible. Others insisted they could adapt existing designs. But all agreed, time favored America. The clearing buzzed with activity. They measured wingspans, logged metal samples, and inspected the cockpit's control linkages. They noted the robustness of its construction. Where Japanese planes used wood and cloth to save weight, this craft used metal to survive combat. One soldier pointed at the intercooler intakes, their placement hinting at careful airflow management. The engineers nodded, acknowledging the sophistication. Turbos allowed the Lightning to maintain power at high altitudes, where thin air robbed engines of strength. Zeros, built for low-altitude agility, could not compete there. The officer imagined a dogfight at 10,000 meters. The Lightning would reign. And what of armament? The nose mounting ensured perfect accuracy. No alignment issues, no wing-mounted spread. Against lightly built Japanese fighters, even brief bursts would be fatal. 5 men lifted a damaged engine cover, peering at the machinery beneath. Pipes, valves, and complex systems greeted them, proof that America's industry could support such innovations. The officer realized that even if Japan could understand this technology, producing it at scale would be nearly impossible under wartime pressures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They removed instruments from the cockpit, analyzing each. The sheer number overwhelmed them. This airplane seemed less a simple fighting machine and more a flying laboratory. Word of the discovery reached Tokyo. Strategists saw the Lightning as a harbinger. If America could deploy such advanced fighters now, what would come next? Rumors spoke of even more powerful designs on assembly lines. Japan, already strained, faced a widening gap, yet not all reactions were dismay. Some pilots felt excitement. They longed to face such machines in combat, to test their skill against worthy foes. The warrior spirit remained strong, but even they admitted that skill could not overcome every advantage. Back in the jungle clearing, dusk approached. Fireflies flickered, and the ambient chorus of insects filled the air. The Lightning rested silently, a metal beast humbled by circumstance, but its impact was far from finished. As shadows deepened, soldiers continued working by lantern light. They traced wiring routes, examined weapon mounts, and catalogued components. Their efforts bordered on reverence. The machine commanded respect, even in ruin. One engineer suggested that the Lightning's design enabled long-range interception, perfect for ambushing bombers before they reached targets. The officer thought of Japan's expanding vulnerability. If American fighters could escort bombers anywhere, no city was safe. Another speculated on future American tactics. Tight formations of P-38 seconds, shepherding bombers across oceans, striking where Japan least expected. The vision unsettled them. Throughout the night, the clearing remained active. They guarded the wreckage carefully, knowing its secrets could shape the war's outcome. By morning, sketches and notes piled high. The officer prepared a report emphasizing the Lightning's strategic significance. In the following days, more teams arrived. They disassembled major components, shipping them to research facilities. The jungle seemed reluctant to release its prize, yet the soldiers persisted. Eventually, the clearing stood empty once more. The aircraft's legacy, however, lived on. Engineers pored over the turbochargers, amazed by their efficiency. They experimented, seeking ways to replicate the performance, but without access to similar materials and manufacturing techniques, their efforts fell short. Pilots studied the Lightning's combat reports. They learned to avoid diving chases, to attack when the P-38 was slow or catch it unawares. But such strategies were often theoretical. In real battles, the Lightning dictated the fight. Even though Japan adapted models and tactics, the gap continued to widen. The Lightning had shown what modern air power required: speed, range, durability, and firepower, supported by robust industry. The abandoned P-38 was the messenger. Its silent presence told Japan that the war of the skies was evolving beyond tradition. It also revealed that the P-38 they found was only one example, perhaps damaged and abandoned. Yet even in that incomplete state, it represented a shift in momentum. Mechanics documented the weight distribution, control surfaces, and fuel configurations, trying to figure out how American pilots could manage such complexity in combat. Pilots whispered about the potential of twin-engine designs, imagining variants powerful enough to escort bombers all the way to the Japanese mainland. The stories grew, each one reinforcing the belief that the Americans had embraced a future Japan struggled to reach. As stories spread through the ranks, training officers speculated that the next wave of aerial duels would not be determined solely by turn rate or tradition, but by engineering leaps. Some argued that the Lightning's design hinted at a new standard multi-role capability, speed, and range. Others believed Japan could quickly adapt, developing new fighters. With improved high-altitude performance and better turbocharging, yet resources were stretched thin, and industrial capacity could not match the pace. Despite skepticism, the fascination remained. Ground crews debated whether the P-38's strengths came from the engines themselves, the aerodynamic shaping, or the advanced use of intercoolers. Pilots wondered what it would feel like to fly such a machine, diving from the stratosphere with confidence, engines roaring in perfect synchrony. The Lightning became a symbol of a technological horizon Japan struggled to reach in time. In the end, the abandoned craft served as a quiet messenger of change. Even without firing a shot, it showed that the war's future would be defined by speed, altitude, and endurance. Though Japan's engineers studied it with determination, they could not overcome shortages of material, fuel, and time. The P-38 remained a reminder that mastery of the skies had begun to pass to those who could innovate fastest, pushing the boundaries of what was once thought possible. The humid dawn at the jungle-claimed airstrip marked the continuation of the strange saga surrounding the abandoned P-38 Lightning. Its silver fuselage, dulled by rain and dust, looked like something from another world to the Japanese ground crew who now circled it. Where Part 1 ended, rumours had already begun to ripple across scattered forward bases. Now, with daylight fully revealing its unusual shape, the P-38 became a quiet teacher of enemy design philosophy, forcing those who studied it to rethink everything they believed about foreign aircraft and the industrial power behind them. Lieutenant Nakamura, still lingering near the nose, noticed how the twin-engine configuration granted redundancy. He spoke softly to a nearby mechanic, explaining how a pilot could survive a single-engine failure and still limp home. During the war in China and the Pacific, too many Japanese pilots were lost because their engines, though light and responsive, lacked the reliability to withstand long-range patrols over ocean or mountains. That single realization gnawed at him. This airplane was designed with strategic depth, recognizing that power meant little if pilots never made it back. The mechanics worked carefully to remove panels from the right engine. Beneath, the Allison V-1710 seemed more compact than expected, yet packed with modern touches they knew were difficult to replicate in home factories stretched by shortages. The tight manufacturing tolerances, smooth fittings, and clever routing of pipes and cables suggested an industrial base capable of miracles. One young mechanic shook his head. He had seen captured American trucks before, yet nothing prepared him for the precise efficiency of this power plant. It was as if the machine had been sculpted by engineers who valued durability as much as performance. A flight test was discussed. Senior officers debated the merits of attempting to restore the P-38 to flight-ready condition. If it could fly, they might test it directly against the vaunted Zero or Key 43. Even if a full restoration proved impossible, taxi runs might yield valuable data. However, a rumor grew among the crew about the captured aircraft's speed. Some claimed it could dive faster than any Japanese machine. Others whispered that its top speed outran the Zero even at level flight. Curiosity overcame caution, and soon the entire airfield buzzed with anticipation. The cockpit fascinated everyone. The seat seemed built for a pilot who would travel far and long. Instruments were plentiful. Multiple gauges for temperature, oil pressure, manifold pressure, fuel levels, and more. A sturdy radio stack dominated the right side. Their own fighters often lacked radios or relied on unreliable short-range sets. Yet here was a machine where communication was as integral as the wings. Cooperation between pilots flying these machines must have been fierce, enabling escorts to coordinate strikes across the Pacific with devastating efficiency. They found the gun cluster impressive. Instead of wing cannons, the P-38 mounted concentrated fire in the nose. 4 .50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. The tactical advantage was clear. At distance, converging fire patterns made aim tricky, but this design flattened the learning curve. A pilot could aim like pointing a spear. Each bullet flew straight ahead, delivering lethal force at long range. The concept seemed brutally simple, yet ingenious. Japanese pilots, trained to close to point-blank range, would face a deadly barrage long before reaching effective distance. Captain Sato, a decorated veteran of early war triumphs, stepped toward the lightning with an uneasy expression. He had outflown Curtiss Hawks and P-42s, danced around heavy bombers, and felt nearly invincible against anything slower. But this machine, wounded yet proud, unsettled him. He imagined facing it in combat. Twin tails flickering against the sun, propellers screaming. The lightning would refuse to turn in traditional duels. Instead, it would dart away, climb to unreachable heights, or stoop in a devastating dive, leaving Zeros helpless to respond. Field notes continued to grow. Aviation engineers drafted sketches, measuring wing chord, tail boom angles, and radiator placement. Each finding was delivered to headquarters by courier. Reports emphasized the Lightning's aerodynamic stability in high-speed dives. The Zero, though unmatched at low speeds, suffered from frail structures when pushed too fast. Attempts to dive aggressively risked structural failure. The P-38 embraced speed as an ally. Its pilot could escape or re-engage at will. The psychological advantage alone reshaped tactical thinking. As the restoration team progressed, they discovered markings inside the cockpit that hinted at maintenance schedules, technical shorthand, and pilot instructions. Everything felt standardized. Japanese aircraft, though, graceful, often relied on individual craftsmanship. The Lightning showed industrial thinking. Build many identical machines, train crews to fix them with shared parts, and deploy in waves. This logic enabled vast squadrons to operate efficiently, something Japan struggled to replicate. The fuel system baffled them. Multiple tanks fed the engines through clever valves. This allowed long flights over the Pacific, hopping from island to island without depending on fragile outposts. In contrast, Japanese fighters were built to fight near bases, demanding constant supply lines. Even long-range variants lacked the comfortable redundancy found here. A pilot had time to think, to manage fuel, to plan a path home. Such foresight was embedded in every bolt. Finally, the engine started. The right-side propeller churned, coughing black smoke before settling into a steady growl. Everyone flinched. The sound was deeper than the piston songs they knew, like a metallic beast waking. The throttle responded smoothly, revealing quick acceleration even at idle. The twin tail shuddered gently. Mechanics held their breath, marveling at how easily the machine revived. Sato watched, his heart steadying. At last, they had glimpsed the enemy's soul. A taxi run was cleared. The pilot, a cautious test flyer named Mori, climbed into the cockpit. He followed notes translated hastily from English. Despite imperfect understanding, he grasped enough to start the left engine. With both propellers spinning, the Lightning looked alive, its presence intimidating. Mori guided it forward. The landing gear absorbed bumps gracefully. As speed increased, dust rose in swirling cones. Observers noted its stability. Tail booms remained aligned, not flexing under stress. Brakes responded with crisp authority. Mori felt the controls through his gloves. The ailerons were firm. Elevator authority seemed strong even at low speed. He returned with a face half lit by awe. After the run, mechanics inspected for leaks or loose fittings. None appeared. Allied engineering seemed to dismiss the pitfalls that plagued many Japanese planes. Sato asked Mori for impressions. The pilot described a sense of confidence, like the aircraft predicted his intentions. During the taxi, he sensed power held in reserve. The engines barely strained. If allowed to lift off, he felt certain it would climb like a hawk freed from the ground. The officers then debated how the P-38 would fare in a simulated dogfight. Some argued the Zero still turned tighter. True. Yet others pointed out that speed and firepower rendered such turn fighting obsolete if the Lightning pilot controlled engagement. War was shifting. Vertical maneuvering, diving attacks, and hit-and-run tactics eclipsed gentle dances in the sky. Night fell, but the Lightning seemed to glow under lantern light. Each reflection on its skin spoke of factories busy with machines, and women and men who assembled these birds at breathtaking pace. Rumors suggested American production lines could deliver thousands each year. The thought haunted them. Could Japanese factories ever match such capacity? Even if they copied the Lightning, they lacked raw materials and tools. Worse, time slipped away like sand. The next morning, intelligence teams arrived to collect data. They photographed every angle, documented serial numbers, and mapped wear patterns. One officer noted that even in rough condition, the machine retained grace. It felt like a predator forced to land in an unfamiliar jungle. Its final flight story remained unknown. Was the pilot rescued, captured, killed? No one knew. Yet the airplane told its own tale. Reports suggested the Lightning served in long-range escort missions, guarding bombers from Papua to the Solomons. Such missions required discipline and robust navigation. This aircraft, with powerful radios and generous fuel stores, delivered. The psychological blow was immense. American pilots could pressure supply lines, attack strategic bases, and defend distant islands. Each mission taught them to fight smart, conserving strength while maximizing surprise. Japanese planners studied the implications. If the war continued at this pace, Lightning squadrons could roam at will. Their reach threatened convoys, airfields, and troop movements. Traditional defenses seemed insufficient. They needed better planes, new tactics, and more resources. Realistically, none would arrive in time. The captured P-38 became both marvel and omen. Sato wrote in his notebook, "This machine is not superior only because of speed or firepower. It is superior because it is supported by a nation that understands war as industry. We must recognize this truth." His words traveled quietly through command channels, echoing like a warning. Even the humblest mechanic felt the weight. The aircraft lay on the ground, yet its presence soared above the war. The Lightning represented not just metal, but foresight, training, logistics, and determination. It was an eagle capable of ignoring borders. To fight it required more than bravery. It required transformation. As days passed, the crew grew protective of the Lightning. They cleaned its surfaces, shielded it from rain, and whispered stories beside it. Some regarded it as a ghost of battles yet to come. Others found hope that understanding this marvel might spark innovation. Maury dreamed of flying it for real, testing its wings against the Zero. But orders remained cautious. The aircraft was too valuable as a learning tool to risk in flight. Parts of the airstrip changed. They erected shade canopies. Engineers arrived with surveying tools. The P-38 had reshaped priorities. In quiet corners, Sato wondered if Japan had already lost the technological race. Perhaps victory lay not in the next battle, but in recognizing limitations and planning retreat. Yet pride resisted such thoughts. 1. Late afternoon, thunderstorms rolled in. Heavy rain hammered the canopy, drumming across metal. Mechanics retreated, leaving the Lightning alone. Its polished skin gleamed beneath flashes of lightning. Nature seemed to honor the machine with a storm worthy of its name. In the distance, thunder rumbled like heavy artillery. Inside a nearby tent, officers discussed the next step: disassembly and transport to a mainland facility. There, deeper study could continue. The move would take weeks. In that time, frontline pilots would continue to fall to P-38 seconds. But perhaps, just perhaps, insights from this captive bird could shift the tide. Maury volunteered to oversee the disassembly. He knew every bolt by now. Sato agreed. Together, they planned carefully to avoid damage. Each component would be labelled, packed, and shipped. The engines would go separately. Instruments needed delicate handling. The gun cluster required secure crates. Logistics took shape. The crew worked into twilight. Fireflies drifted through the humid air. The lightning stood silent, its engines cooling. To Maury, it seemed almost alive, as if waiting for its pilot to return. He imagined sitting in the cockpit under moonlight, engines roaring, wheels lifting from the earth. For a moment, he believed he could feel the rush of wind against his face, the freedom of the sky. Yet reality held firm. The war continued. The lightning would not fly here. But the knowledge it carried would travel far. It had opened eyes, challenged assumptions, and forced respect. In the heart of a distant jungle, the P-38 accomplished a quiet victory, changing minds without firing a shot. In the weeks that followed, the partially dismantled Lightning stood as a quiet monument beside the airstrip. Soldiers passing by paused to study its curves, whispering that its spirit lingered. Though crates awaited shipment, no one hurried. Respect demanded patience. Each day, storms cooled the air, and birds nested near its tail. The war raged elsewhere, but here a different battle unfolded, a battle for understanding. Men who once doubted foreign machines now learned from them, believing these lessons would shape future skies in ways they never imagined before together. The winter of 1944 wrapped the mountains like a tightening fist, and every morning we awoke to a new layer of ice painted over the ridges. Snow had become the only constant, blanketing ruins, foxholes, broken cannons, and the young men who slept beneath white tarps and thin wool coats. Our battalion had been reduced to barely half strength, and the front line had dissolved into scattered pockets of men fighting simply to make it home alive. The radio crackled less and less, not from silence, but from the dead batteries and frozen fingers that could no longer change the dials. I remember hearing distant artillery, muffled by snow, and realizing we no longer needed to ask which side fired it. It was simply war, unclaimed violence echoing through valleys. We moved through a shattered village whose name we never learned. The church had lost its steeple, the schoolhouse was burned to its stone frame, and only half a wall remained of what had once been a bakery. The smell of smoke and wet timber hung over everything. Our sergeant ordered us to take shelter until sundown, saying the road ahead was crawling with patrols. We crowded into the ruins of a farmhouse, its roof sagging, the windows shattered. Inside, we found a table covered in dust and a child's drawing pinned to a beam stick, figures holding hands beneath a sun. The drawing felt more fragile than the broken walls around us. I volunteered to take first watch. I sat by what remained of the front door, staring at the drifted snow. The sky glowed silver, and though the wind cut at my cheeks, I kept my rifle steady. Sometimes I imagined home flat fields, soft rains, a kitchen that always smelled of bread. But every time the image came to me, another would follow. Men I'd known, now gone, the sound of someone's last breath, the shrill whistle of incoming shells. A soldier learns quickly that memory is a double-edged thing. That night, we received word that reinforcements would not be arriving for at least another week. The supply lines were broken again. We grew used to small portions, dry bread, cold beans, whatever we could scavenge. We boiled snow when we could, though the sergeant warned us to melt the clean stuff away from the roads. Sometimes, even water felt like a gift. Just before dawn, a sound stirred me. A faint crunching, like footsteps pressed carefully into ice. I lifted my rifle, signaling the others to stay quiet. Shapes emerged from the mist, and I braced myself before recognizing the distinct outline of Allied helmets. They were scouts, lean and frostbitten, carrying good news and bad. The good news: a nearby ridge had been taken, and we were to join a push eastward. The bad news: enemy armor had begun repositioning, and our narrow valley might soon become a trap. We packed quickly and began climbing the northern slope. The snow was knee-deep, and every step felt like lifting a stone. The air grew thinner, and frost gathered on our rifles. By midday, my hands ached so badly I wondered if I'd ever regain feeling. We paused beside a grove of pines, and that was when we met the others, another squad, 10 men strong. At their head was Lieutenant Norris, a thin man whose eyes seemed too sharp for his worn features. He greeted us with a nod and spoke in a low voice about our objective. "We're pushing toward the pass," he said. "If we control it, we prevent armor from rolling into the lowlands. Lose it, and the whole line collapses." We nodded, though everyone sensed the odds were thin. Taking a mountain pass in winter required more than courage. It demanded a sacrifice. Still, we pressed forward, step by frozen step. Around sunset, we reached a rocky plateau where dead branches rested like skeletal and fingers in the snow. Our orders were to dig in and wait for artillery support that might come by morning. I shared a foxhole with my friend, Martin, a quiet man from a mining town out west. He always carried a small tin box filled with trinkets, a button from his wife's coat, a pebble from his hometown river, and a tiny folded note he never opened in front of us. He told me once the note was the first thing his wife ever wrote for him. The way he spoke of her, even in the cold, placed warmth in the air. We huddled together for warmth. The wind howled through the trees above us, and every few minutes we brushed snow from our coats to keep from freezing. I could see my breath hanging heavy in the dark, and I listened to Martin whisper a quiet prayer. It made me wonder if anyone prayed for us back home. I liked to think so. Before dawn, artillery woke us. The shells fell far from our position, but the ground still trembled. We moved at first light, spreading out among the ridges. It blinded us, and the slope beneath us crumbled. We crawled where we could, staying low. Just ahead, machine gun fire erupted, sending chips of ice into the air. The pass was defended more heavily than expected. Our lieutenant signalled for us to flank left, and we slid down a steep chute, landing behind a cluster of boulders just as bullets cracked overhead. I remember the sound of Martin cursing under his breath as he loaded his weapon. We exchanged glances, then hurtled out from cover, firing bursts into the drifts where enemy rifles flashed. I could barely see shapes, only motion and shadow. The cold made my movements clumsy, but adrenaline carried me. We advanced, dodging the burst of automatic fire. A grenade whistled past me and landed behind a rock. I shouted, shoving Martin forward. The explosion lifted a wave of snow into the sky. My ears rang. When I stood, I found blood in the snow, but no body. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was gone. Then I saw him crawling toward me, shaken but alive. We regrouped behind a fallen tree. Ahead, enemy positions were dug deep into the ridge. Lieutenant Norris ordered us to suppress while another squad climbed from the rear. We fired, careful and deliberate. Snow burst like smoke wherever bullets struck. Time stretched. I lost myself in the rhythm of shooting, reloading, and scanning. Finally, a flare rose from behind the enemy line, the signal that their flank had collapsed. We charged. Our boots slipped, our breath burned, but we fought with everything we had. The ridge fell after an hour, though it felt like eternity. When silence came, it felt heavier than the gunfire. We gathered our wounded and counted the fallen. A medic knelt beside a young soldier, his face pale against red snow. The medic worked quietly, pressing bandages and whispering encouragement, though we all saw the boy's eyes clouding. I stood beside him until his breathing stopped. I didn't even know his name. We spent that night holding the ridge. The wind cut like knives, and we wrapped ourselves in anything warm we could find. I sat beside Martin, who had taken a splinter of metal in the shoulder. He forced a smile, wincing through the pain. I packed snow against the wound to numb it. We joked about the food we'd eat when the war ended: roast chicken, apple pies, fresh butter on bread. We laughed softly because laughter was all we had. Morning brought new orders. Move to the valley and secure a supply route. Reinforcements were days away, and we had little ammunition. Still, we marched, our feet numb, our faces red with cold. The valley below was quiet, too quiet. We crossed frozen fields and approached a cluster of barns. Inside, we found livestock that had died from the cold, their bodies stiff. The smell was faint, but the sight was worse. Life had fled these places long before we arrived. We pressed onward, following a narrow trail beside a frozen stream. That was when we heard a faint cry. At first, we thought it was wind, but then it came again, soft, pained. We approached carefully, rifles ready. Beneath a pine tree lay a man, wounded and barely conscious. His uniform was enemy, but his gloves were missing, and his hands were blue. His breath came in shallow puffs. Our lieutenant hesitated, then ordered us to carry him. War makes strange decisions. We lifted him onto a tarp and pulled him through snow until we reached an abandoned cottage. Inside, he shivered violently. Martin offered him water, and the man whispered something we didn't understand. Even so, Martin spoke softly back, as if words alone could warm him. We built a fire. The flames were small, but the warmth felt miraculous. The wounded man stared at us with weary eyes. I wondered if he had a wife who had written him a note, tucked into a pocket, waiting for him to return. War made enemies of strangers, yet suffering was a common language. That night, we heard engines in the distance. Our lieutenant ordered us to douse the fire. We crouched in silence, listening. The engines passed without stopping. The wounded man slept, his breathing shallow. Martin checked on him often, adjusting his blankets. I admired his compassion. In war, kindness becomes an act of rebellion. By morning, the man was dead. Martin closed his eyes and whispered the same prayer he said every night. We buried him outside beneath a cairn of stones. The ground was too frozen to dig deep, but we did what we could. As we placed the last stone, snow began to fall again. We continued toward the supply route. Hours passed, and the sun never broke through the clouds. Toward evening, we reached a collapsed bridge spanning a deep ravine. The supply road lay on the other side. Lieutenant Norris studied the map, then pointed to a narrow footpath winding down and across. We descended carefully, clinging to exposed roots. Halfway down, the path crumbled. I grabbed a branch, dangling as snow fell past me. Martin reached out, pulling me to safety. My heart thundered. We continued with more caution. Crossing the ravine took until nightfall. On the far side, we made camp beneath a rocky overhang. We shared the last of our rations. As darkness settled, the sky cleared, revealing stars like frozen lanterns. Some men spoke of home, others simply listened. I thought of the drawing we'd found in the ruined farmhouse. I imagined the child who made it, hoping their family had found safety. In war, hope becomes as precious as food. The next morning, we pushed onward. We reached the supply route by midday, only to find it littered with burned trucks. Supplies had been destroyed, and tire tracks led east. Our lieutenant cursed under his breath. We searched the wreckage, gathering whatever we could. Canned meat, blankets, a handful of bullets. It wasn't much, but it meant survival. We followed the tracks, determined to locate whoever had raided the convoy. The trail gradually climbed into another set of hills. Snow thickened again, and soon we found footprints. They led to a cave hidden beneath a ridge. Lieutenant Norris signalled silence. We crept forward, peering inside. Flickering light revealed figures huddled around crates. Armed, alert, we attacked swiftly. Gunfire exploded in the confined space. Echoes thundered off stone. I moved instinctively, firing bursts, ducking behind rocks. The smell of gunpowder mixed with cold air. Figures fell, shouting. A grenade rolled across the floor. I dove. The explosion shook the cave, filling it with dust. When the air cleared, only a few remained. They surrendered quickly, raising trembling hands. Inside the crates, we found precious supplies, medical kits, food, ammunition, enough to keep our battalion alive. We secured the cave and sent scouts to signal our position. Reinforcements arrived a day later. Seeing friendly faces felt like salvation. We were ordered back to the ridge. As we marched, I looked at my squad, tired, wounded, yet still walking. We had survived the mountain pass, the valley, the ravine, the cave. But survival wasn't victory. It was simply another chance to see tomorrow. When we reached the ridge, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Light spilled across the snow, turning the world gold. For a moment, war felt distant. Martin stood beside me, his shoulder bandaged, his breath steady. He smiled, a small, tired smile. "We're still here," he said. "Yes," I replied. "We're still here." The snow continued to fall, soft and quiet, erasing footprints, covering the scars of battle. But beneath that silent blanket, memories remained etched into the earth and into us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.